All right. Oh
Thank you.
boy, that's, should I start over?
No, carry on. This is a good starting.
Oh, I'm sorry. Um, yeah, next time just jump in, Deborah, no problem. Um, so now we've got rebounding seal populations here in New England and Canada, and coming back to levels that they were probably back in the 1800s. Um, and in response to that, and I'm telling you all this is because white sharks eat seals. And if you've got an overlap in white shark populations with seal populations on a seasonal basis or year round, you will see white sharks consume seals. And that is exactly what's happening. So, what's been going on over the last 10 or 15 years is as seal populations have responded to protection and are now recolonizing Massachusetts, we are seeing white sharks move closer to shore to feed on these seals. And that's exactly what's happening off Cape Cod predominantly. We'll talk more about the rest of Massachusetts in a second. So here we have a white shark in this photograph hunting these seals really close to shore. This is, within 10 yards of the shoreline. You can see the shoreline right here. And what these seals are doing is staying just shallow enough so that the shark can't get to them. And so this is unfolding in areas where people also recreate. And now we have not only the overlap of a top predator, great white shark, its prey, gray seals, and to some extent harbor seals, but also human activities occurring in these very same areas that are also dependent from an economic point of view on tourism. And so that creates somewhat of an issue. And if we look historically at interactions between sharks and people, we had to go back until recently. We had to go back to 1936, and this is the old New Bedford Standard Times, and which we're all familiar with. And the headline is "A Shark Kills a Swimmer in Mattapoisett," and that swimmer was Joseph Troy. He was only 16 years old, and he was killed by a white shark in Mattapoisett. That was our last fatal shark attack in Massachusetts until recently. And now with the overlap again of these sharks and the seals, and this is where Mr. Troy was killed, we have had a number of interactions. Not all of them have been fatal, but in 2012, a swimmer was bitten off Truro. Kayakers kayak was bitten in 2014 off Plymouth. Paddleboard had his paddleboard bitten in 2017. In 2018, we had 2 attacks. Another one in Truro that was not fatal, but did extensive damage to a swimmer. And then in 2018, September, we had a boogie boarder who was killed by a white shark. So we had gone so many years without any interactions between sharks and people here in Massachusetts to, I would say, a relatively high number. And this has caused us to take a close look at what's going on in Massachusetts specific to these nearshore areas. And so our goal has kind of shifted from studying this species on a broader scale relative to its natural history to try to get a sense of how this shark goes about its business of hunting seals. We think if we can understand white shark hunting behavior in shallow water, we can understand when people might be most, or where people might be most at risk. So the rest of this talk is really going to focus on white shark predatory behavior. And I'm going to try to answer this question of when, where, and how white sharks hunt their natural prey, which are seals. And I'll tell you the techniques that we're using to tease out answers to these questions. Most of them involve the use of sophisticated tags that didn't exist when I was in college, which was several decades ago. But we've seen a massive explosion in technology that we're using today to tag, to learn about marine animals. And the technique we use to tag white sharks is actually fairly unique in the world. Because these sharks are so close to shore and therefore human activities, We don't want to do what other researchers do, which is chum the waters, draw the sharks to us, capture the sharks, stress them out. Instead, what we do is we go to the sharks. So you'll see this inset here of a spotter pilot. That is Wayne Davis. He is up in the air working with us. He spots the sharks while they're in shallow water. Then we go up to the sharks with our small boat, and the boat has this long pulpit, this stand on its bow. And I walk out to the end of the stand. We're able to basically sneak up on these sharks and place the tags in them using a very small intramuscular dart right at the base of this dorsal fin while the shark is just swimming along. So we're trying to minimize any invasive tagging and any stress we would impose on the animal. The last thing we want to do is, number one, study abnormal behavior. Number two, cause that shark to do anything erratic. Remember, these sharks are very close to human activities. So I'm going to show you a video of that. And here I am out on the pulpit of the boat. The spotter pilot has talked to the captain on the boat. John King is the captain, Wayne Davis the spotter. And he's telling us where it is. And once we get close to the shark, I'm able to use this long tagging pole, which has a little needle on the end, a little dart, and then this is the tag at the very end. So you're going to see how I just come up on the shark. The shark basically doesn't know I'm there. Just going to place that tag right at the base of the dorsal fin, which is the area that we have been using tagging sharks for 60, 70 years. And I'll show that again just so you can see how easy it is. Well, easy it looks, but how benign it is in terms of the way we tag. The tag I put on that shark is an acoustic tag. So we're going to talk about the different tags we're using now. And I'm going to walk through them, and we're going to focus on just a couple of them. So from 2009 up until 2020, we have tagged 230 individual white sharks using various technologies. And to give you a sense of where most of our research is done and where we have actually seen white sharks, you can see them here on the right side of the screen of the outer cape. All these little triangles are places that we have seen white sharks. So when people ask me, are there any parts of Cape Cod on the outer cape where there are no white sharks? As you can see, the answer is actually quite simple. No. We've also been tagging a little bit over the last 2 summers in Cape Cod Bay, specifically on Billingsgate Shoal and Brewster Flats. So you can see where they're occurring here. Now, does that mean there are no white sharks in Nantucket Sound and no other white sharks in Cape Cod Bay? No, not necessarily. This might only reflect where we are doing our work. So how can we go about asking and answering those questions? Well, where else do these sharks occur? And that's the technology here. This acoustic technology is very similar to what Frank Carey used back in the late 70s. And as I said, I can buy these tags now. What's different about them is they emit these very high frequency sounds, but we don't follow them in a boat like Frank did. Instead, what we do is we set up an array of acoustic receivers all over the state of Massachusetts to see where these sharks spend their time. And so acoustic tags now last for about 10 years. So we can follow individual sharks from year to year to see when do they arrive in Cape Cod, where do they spend their time, when do they leave, and do they ever come back again? So those are the questions that we can answer using these acoustic tags. These pop-up satellite tags, which are highlighted here, these 2 tags on the bottom, are satellite-linked technology. Pop-up satellite tag, we put on the shark for X amount of time. So I could program the tag to actually come off the shark. So while it's on the shark, it collects depth, temperature information, light levels, really oceanographic information. And then it comes off the shark for up to a year later, floats to the surface and transmits those data to a satellite. So we can then recreate what that shark did over broader scales. So I'll talk a little bit about pop-up satellite tags in this as well. And then the real-time satellite tag is one you actually put at the top of the dorsal fin of the shark. And as opposed to these other 2, which are affixed with a small intramuscular dart, this one you have to capture the shark. And so we prefer not to do that. So most of that real-time satellite tagging we do when the sharks are off the southeastern U.S. In the wintertime. So I work with captains down there. So you capture the shark, you put the tag on the dorsal fin with bolts, and then anytime that shark comes to the surface, it transmits to a satellite, and that information is relayed to me, and we can put that on a software program like Sharktivity, which is an app. You can see where the sharks are in almost real time. And so now let's try to answer some of these questions regarding when, where, and how white sharks hunt their prey using these various technologies. So here's again the acoustic tag technology. The receivers look like this. Figure they're about a foot tall and 3 inches wide. So just like a piece of 3-inch diameter PVC. It's got a battery and a hydrophone built into it. And I put these receivers all over the state working with harbor masters in each of the towns. And this is the tag on the shark emitting this ping. The ping is picked up by the receiver over a specific detection range. That range is generally on the order of about 400 to 500 meters, or roughly 4 or 5 football fields. So anytime the shark swims within that range, the receiver hears the shark, determines who that shark is, the serial number of that shark, and then the date and the time, and it simply logs that information in the receiver. And then we go back and collect the receivers and determine what sharks were there. So I can answer questions like, are sharks in Buzzards Bay? Are the sharks going into Nantucket Sound? Do they go into Cape Cod Bay? Are they hanging out in Boston Harbor? Those are all questions we can answer without having to go and look for the sharks. And so this little graphic here gives you a neat little diagram of what our receiver array looks like, which are all these yellow dots. And then a shark with acoustic tags as they swim within the range of these receivers and are detected by the receiver array. So it gives you a sense of how the technology works. It's a pretty cool animation of the acoustic receiver array and the sharks that are tagged. So if we take a two-dimensional look at that, we could see all these little white circles. Every one of those are acoustic receivers that we have put out. There are more than 2 in Nantucket Sound. Actually, there's another dozen or so that are put out by the New England Aquarium to study another species, not white sharks, but they will detect our white sharks. We also have a number of them all the way up in Buzzards Bay, including Mattapoisett, Cleveland Ledge, Sippawisset. We have a gate that also extends across to Westport from the Elizabeth Islands. And so what I want you to see here is all these white circles, which are acoustic receivers, but also notice the stars and the red boxes. The stars are live receivers. And all that means is these white circles, I have to collect them to get the data. Whereas the live receiver will actually transmit those data directly to me immediately. So what we've done is we've put these receivers at very popular swimming beaches, and we've interfaced that data with not only the Sharktivity app, which notifies people if a shark is detected, but we also send that immediately to lifeguards on the beach. So anytime one of these tagged white sharks, and I'll emphasize tagged, white shark swims within the range of one of these starred receivers, a lifeguard on the beach will get a notice that basically says, you've got a white shark in your swimming area. So it's a technology we're testing to get a sense of whether the towns and the lifeguards will find that information useful for helping to manage their beaches. And so far, many of the towns have expressed interest and do enjoy having the data come into them in real time. The reason we don't use all live receivers is because the basic acoustic receiver costs me about $2,000. The live receiver costs me about $14,000. And so there's a huge expense associated with that technology, and it's taken us time to raise that money. The other thing I want to point out that I'm going to talk about a little bit later is this fine scale arrays. We've got 2 fine scale arrays set up. One of them off Head of the Meadow Beach in Truro, the other off Nauset Beach in Orleans. And all these fine arrays mean is that we've taken 30 receivers and put them so close together that we can determine where the shark is exactly in those areas. So I'll talk about that at the end of the talk, but it'll give you a sense of how we're looking at really fine scale behavior of these animals relative to the bathymetry, the depth, the oceanography of the area, how these animals are behaving relative to the very dynamic environment that we have out on Cape Cod. And so let's walk through some of these questions. When are white sharks here? Well, all we've really got to do is take all of our acoustic data that come in from these receivers and plot them against the month. And we can get a seasonality that is very distinctive for white sharks. In June, white sharks, early June, begin to arrive. They start to ramp up in July, but our peak months when white sharks are in Massachusetts waters are August, September, and October. As water temperatures begin to cool down, because their presence is driven by water temperature, once it gets too cold for them, they will begin to leave, and a handful of sharks might stick around until mid-December. So we have a very distinctive seasonality that the white sharks are here. Even though their prey, the seals, are here year-round, they cannot be here year-round because the white sharks are sensitive to water temperatures below 48, 49 degrees. Once we get dips below that, the sharks have to leave. They move off to warmer areas. And so if you are a surfer and you don't mind surfing in cold water, then you might choose to surf in December, January, February, March, and April, and May. But if you're managing beaches in the summertime, you're already a little bit concerned because your peak month of August, maybe early September, are also peak months for white shark presence. So we're starting to look at this seasonality. Now, where do they spend their time? Where do the white sharks spend their time when they come to Massachusetts? We know when they're here. Where do they spend their time? So this next plot I'm going to show you is all the acoustic receivers. Remember, and I apologize for not showing. Well, actually, the reason you don't see any dots in Buzzards Bay is because no white sharks are detected except for in Buzzards Bay, and as a result, they don't show up. But what you see here is the size of the dot that you see is proportional to the number of sharks detected by those receivers. So what jumps out at you immediately is the Outer Cape, as well as the eastern part of Cape Cod Bay. We have virtually no detections in Nantucket Sound, Vineyard Sound, Buzzards Bay, very, very few along the South Shore. But not until you get to these areas where we have high densities of seals do you see white sharks in any numbers. And you can see the eastern part of the bay, and then, of course, the Outer Cape, where we get as many as 60 or 70 over the course of the summer of our tagged sharks returning each year. So what I'm going to do is combine the spatial data with the temporal data, so time and space. And what you're going to see here is the arrival of white sharks in 2019 in June, and then you'll see the dominance of the Outer Cape as we get into July, and the date is up here in the upper part of the screen, upper left. And we're basically walking through 2019 as tagged white sharks return to Cape Cod. We're now in the peak month of August into September. We'll see white sharks start to appear along the South Shore as some of them move up into the Gulf of Maine. Now we're into October. We're seeing sharks now come out of the Gulf of Maine. So you'll see some blips that occur along the South Coast. You see virtually nothing in Nantucket Sound, Buzzards Bay. And then you'll see sharks all but disappear as we get into November and then December. So that's the seasonality of white sharks coming into Massachusetts waters, when they arrive, where they spend their time. And all of it comes from this array of acoustic receivers. I will tell you, and although you did not see it in this particular graphic, The only time we see white sharks occurring, even remotely near the entrance of Buzzards Bay, is early in the season, generally in June, as white sharks begin to arrive in the Massachusetts waters. They may come up to the Elizabeth Islands, um, right along the mouth of Buzzards Bay. They do not enter Buzzards Bay, and then they move along the south coasts of Martha's Vineyard and Nantucket Islands, because their real target, what they really want to get to, is where the restaurant is. And that restaurant is all along the outer Cape. So it's a great technology that tells us about the movements of these animals in time and space. But as you can see in this graphic, it's as good as my array. So if there are places where I don't have receivers, those sharks could be going there and I wouldn't know it. These receivers, as you know, are expensive, and it's time consuming, it's labor intensive to put them out and bring them back in each year. So we can't put out 1,000 receivers. We can't afford them, and we don't have the manpower to do that. So in those cases, what we try to use is this satellite linked technology to try to fill in the holes relative to the behavior. You know, just because we see the sharks around the nearshore areas of Cape Cod, does that mean they spend all of their time in shallow water? How much time do they actually spend close to shore? So what we did was we used these pop-up satellite tags. And remember, this is the tag that collects data on temperature and depth, but then pops off the animals. So what we decided to do back in 2017 was put out a bunch of these tags on animals that we knew would stick around Cape Cod. So the ones that are hanging out year to year around Cape Cod in the summertime. We only put them out for about a month. And so we wanted to collect as much data on the temperature and depth of these animals over a course of a month. And so here's a good example of a shark we tagged on July 20th of 2017. The tag popped up really close to shore a month later. So we knew this shark was likely in the area for that entire period. So now I'm going to show you data collected by 8 of these tags, just so you can get a sense of whether these sharks spend all their time shallow or actually move to deeper areas. And so each one of these boxes is a different shark. The number of the shark at the top, 163, 368, for example. This is the depth of the shark each day over the course of that month. So this particular shark, 163, 368, was tagged in mid-July, and you could see the depth that it went to each one of those days. And then the days that it was picked up by our acoustic receivers are marked with X's. So we know the shark was close to shore on those days, but perhaps these days it wasn't within our acoustic receiver array. And certainly when the shark went to depths as great as 60, 75 meters, 100, 200 feet deep, it was moving offshore. So the sharks do not spend all their time just hugging the shoreline. And I can understand why. They come in to feed, but we all know the closer you get to shore, particularly along the outer Cape, the more dynamic that environment is. You've got surf, you've got sandbar systems, you've got turbid areas, poor visibility, you've got currents and tide. And that's very challenging for an animal that might be 2,000, 3,000 pounds. And so the animals clearly don't spend all their time in shallow water. Some of them move out to depths as great as 100 meters, 300 feet deep. But what we found is really interesting when we modeled these data sets, they spend almost half their time in water less than 15 feet deep. So that's primarily where human activities occur. So we're starting to tease out some of this fine scale behavior. We know that 50% of the time, there's a probability that a shark is going to be in that shark is going to be in shallow water, overlapping with human activities. So if I'm managing a beach on the outer Cape, I'm already very, very cognizant of the fact that that's a fairly high probability of that particular shark being in shallow water. But how do we really tease out some of these fine scale behaviors? And now I'll talk about how they go about hunting seals. And so the easy way to study that is you just place yourself in an area and you watch, right? So we're out on the water probably 20 to 30 times a season. Every time we go on the water, it's expensive. We have a boat, we have a plane. Um, but we sit out there sometimes, we're tagging our sharks, and we're also observing seals. So maybe we can actually watch a white shark hunt a seal. If it hunts a seal, we can get a sense of when that happens and what are the conditions surrounding that predatory event. Was it high tide? Was it day? Was it morning, afternoon? What was the current doing? Was it a full moon? You know, these are really basic questions. We're looking for patterns. And so there are days that we're out there and we will see a white shark hunting a seal. And that's exactly what you see in this photograph, a white shark charging a seal into shallow water. This is not a stupid seal. This seal realizes that the only way I can get away from this big fish that wants to eat me is by going into shallow water. And this particular seal survived because it got into the shallows where this white shark could not go. Um, this is not the case for this particular seal. This seal made a mistake. It was out into relative. You can still see it's close to shore, but that's relatively deep water. That's where that seal was killed. Was probably about 10 feet of water, and that's plenty of room for a white shark to come in and to attack and kill it. And so we can compile data from these predatory events and look for patterns. So here's a video of a white shark that was eating a seal, and we're observing it. We are recording its behavior as it's eating the seal. But what's really remarkable, you have thousands of seals and likely dozens to hundreds of white sharks, but we've actually only seen this kind of behavior a handful of times. You would think that I'd be watching white sharks eat seals every day, all day, but that's not the case. So we're not collecting enough information by being on the water to determine when, where, and how they're going about doing this. You know, we don't have enough information to learn, see patterns, you know, and we're not out there at night because we can't see anything at night. So what we're trying to do now is use some of the newer technologies to study behavior when we're not there. And that involves, again, using the acoustic tags and some other technology. And then what you see with this white shark consuming this seal is it's tearing off that very, very thick, rich blubber layer. It's targeting the fat. You know, it wants the bacon on this seal because that is rich in energy. That's why white sharks will target seals, not only because they have the capability, but because it gives them a tremendous amount of energy. And it's estimated that if a white shark feeds on a seal, it might not have to feed for a minimum of 2 weeks. So if it only has to feed every 2 weeks, then going after seals from an energetically point of view is very profitable. So now I'll go back to my little red box. Remember, we have acoustic arrays up off Truro and Nauset. And this is what those arrays look like. This is a satellite image of Truro, head of the Meadow Beach. What you see in this is all these little triangles. These triangles represent acoustic receivers that we've put really, really close together. And we're working with the Center for Coastal Studies and specifically Brian Laguerre over there, who's a PhD student working on this project. And what we want to figure out is how are the white sharks using the habitat to their advantage? So all these colors you see are the various depths of this area. So Brian's gone in and put this array in, and he's also mapped the area. And what you can see here is a yellow sandbar, and then another yellow sandbar with some deep water, yellow troughs. This is deep water, the yellow is deep, and the purples are shallow. So we got a sandbar here, a deep trough, and then another sandbar, and then deep water out to very deep water. So how do the white sharks come in and utilize these areas to get to the seals that are piled on the beach? What are they using the environment to their advantage? And what does this mean relative to public safety? And so by having the receivers so close together, we're able to triangulate the exact positions of the sharks as they move through these areas. And we've done the same thing at Nauset Beach in Orleans. And here you can see, again, the mapped habitat, the deeper water is in red here and the darker purples. And as we get lighter and lighter, we can see the shallows. And again, anytime a white shark swims through, we can map what it's doing. So I'm going to show you a data set from Head of the Meadow Beach over the course of just a couple of weeks back in 2019 when we collected the data. We have data from 2020, but we're still analyzing them from both areas. So these are the individual tracks of white sharks as they came into the area. 31 of our tagged white sharks over the course of about 3 weeks, extending from September 15th to October 5th of 2019. So what you can see is we're able to actually see how the sharks are approaching these areas, and we can compare that to what was the time of day when they came in, what was the tide when they came in, what was the current doing, where were the seals, what were the seals doing, were there swimmers in the area? So we can start to look at these patterns as it relates to these other factors, and we can start to map that. So what you see in this graphic is the sandbar systems and the individual movements of a white shark as it went through one of these acoustic receiver arrays off of Head of the Meadow Beach. So we can see the movements of this animal as it relates to the tide, as it relates to the time of day. So these are data that we're analyzing. We're running models relative to all those environmental factors. The little black dots you see are the receivers. And we can really look at this fine scale behavior as it relates to all those factors and look for patterns. Ultimately, the goal is if we can find patterns, we can forecast. You know, that's what it's all about. You analyze data, you find patterns, you run models, and then you forecast using those models to perhaps tell people where they are most likely or less likely to encounter a white shark. So that's the ultimate goal of the study. And by combining all these data sets, we're learning about the patterns of this top species. So with that, I'll show you a graphic of how we can combine these data to look at the behavior of a white shark. This is a computer animated white shark based on one of our data sets that goes after seals. In this case, misses the seals, but it's how we can recreate this incredible predator-prey relationship by investigating data sets that we are collecting using these various technologies. So I'm going to end there. I'll ask you all to stay tuned because I'm not drawing any major conclusions yet, but perhaps I'll come back in a year or two and show you what we've learned from these technologies relative to those patterns. The worst case scenario from a scientific point of view is you don't find patterns, right? And that's not what we want, right? The best case scenario is we find statistically valid models and we're able to forecast those areas where white sharks are occurring that might present risk to swimmers. And so I'll mention the New England White Shark Consortium. These are folks that I work with on these various research projects from state agencies, partnering states, nearby states, to environmental groups, conservation groups, to universities, as well as our fisheries counterparts at the federal and international level. And I'll thank the various folks who have contributed to our research over the years and highlight specifically the Atlantic White Shark Conservancy, which basically funds all of our research. And I will also, tout my shark handbook, which I wrote a bunch of years ago. That's a basic primer on shark biology and how we go about studying them, and then also mention The Great White Shark Scientist, which is a great book for kids about our research written by Cy Montgomery. And so with that, I think I have to hand this back to you, Deborah, right?
Yeah. Well, I don't know that you have to.
Well, maybe I don't. I can hear you.
Yeah, I just unmuted myself, and we didn't have tons of questions. But first of all, thank you so much, Greg. That was
you're welcome.
fascinating. I mean, I learned a ton, and it's really interesting to see how you've managed to, to put together all those different methods to triangulate the information from so many perspectives. So that's really incredible. The first question we had was just a location question, which was, where was the beach that was photographed with all the seals that was lying on the beach?
That's the Outer Cape. Yeah, that's the Outer Cape. That was one of those sand we were talking a little bit earlier about this with Steve. The sandbars come and go on the outer cape. It's a very dynamic environment, and so at low tide, some of these appear, and the seals will pile up in massive numbers.
Mm-hmm.
But you can see how it will draw in these sharks. I mean, that's a viable, that's a nice restaurant.
Yeah, that was
if you're in white shark.
So there were a couple of questions about are the sharks dangerous for kayakers? And I think you already did mention that one kayak was hit up in the tip of the Cape. The question also came up was whether white sharks were dangerous for scuba divers. And I imagine that would be the case.
So we have to I think we put danger in context, right? And we talk a lot as shark scientists about how difficult it is to study shark attack because it happens so rarely. And we all have heard the analogies relative to, car accidents and lightning strikes and all those kinds of things. On a relative scale, the probability of a shark attack is extremely low, but it's generally surface activities. So surfers, boogie boarders, kayaks have been struck. Obviously, the paddle board was struck. Divers, when they're on the bottom, tend to be safer unless they're spearing fish.
Right.
So spear fishermen, and I used to love spearing fish at the mouth of the Westport River, and I would keep doing that. There's not a preponderance of white sharks there. So divers in Buzzards Bay, it really boils down to that map where I showed you the hot spots.
Yeah.
That's what it boils down to.
Okay, couple of other questions. This is sort of about the general lifespan. How long do they live?
We wrote a paper a few years ago and demonstrated using various new techniques that white sharks live in excess of 70 years.
Wow.
And that's about twice as long as anybody thought, which is really cool, right? So now when I see a 16, 17, 18-foot white shark, I might be looking at a 50 or 60-year-old fish. And you think about, wow, you think of what we've lived through over the years, and these animals have done the same thing,
Okay, a couple other questions. Where do they go after when they leave after the October season? Where are they aiming for?
I will, I threw this in there because I sometimes get this question. Where do they go when they leave? And so remember all my little green dots? Mm-hmm. The green dots were fisheries dependent data, so they didn't tell the whole story. And so what you see is white sharks basically move south in the wintertime. So they'll overwinter from basically Cape Hatteras down to the Gulf of Mexico. But some of the sharks move out into the open Atlantic. And so we never even knew white sharks occurred out here. Mm-hmm. Remember my green dots? They go out here, when white sharks leave, they dive to remarkable depths. These depths are in excess of 1,000 meters, so 3,000 feet deep. These are white sharks on the shelf. When the white shark leaves, dives to depths in excess of 1,000 meters to a really broad temperature range. And of course, that begs all kinds of questions that we can't answer. What are white sharks doing in the middle of the Atlantic?
Yeah, fascinating. One other question that came up is, are there transmitters around the vineyard at all or not? It didn't look like so many from your maps.
Yeah, we need to update the map, and I apologize. That animation was done. That animation was done by a student, and she left out a few of the receivers. There are 3 receivers off Martha's Vineyard right now. One near Noman's Island and 2 over on the eastern side. And so they get detections typically in October as sharks are leaving the area. Sometimes they'll get detections in June as they're arriving in the area, but there's no residency off the islands. I do not have receivers on Nantucket because logistically it's been a nightmare for me to get them out there. However, we just brought a student on through the New England Aquarium in UMass Boston. It's going to put 15 receivers around Nantucket. So I'm very excited about that. We'll be able to fill in some of those blanks.
Okay, a couple more questions came in about Cuttyhunk Island, which has quite a seal population apparently. What have you tracked around there? That's one of the Elizabethan Islands, I believe.
Right. We had receivers that extended from Cutty Hunk to Westport. And as I said earlier, the only detections on those receivers are early in the season as sharks begin to arrive. They pass by close by the mouth of Buzzards Bay in early to mid-June, and then they don't spend any time. They seem to be just
on their way
moving through. And I'll tell you, Buzzards Bay is a dynamic water body that's relatively shallow and warm. And white sharks don't like the warm water, and the seals don't like the. We see the seals now, right? But as things warm up, the seals will move out east.
The other question that came in was about how shallow are the waters when the attacks occur? I mean, you said that if the seals were quick enough to get to 10 feet, they were out of danger. Is that about right?
10 feet of water is actually dangerous for them.
Okay.
They need to be in shallower than 5 feet of water.
Oh my gosh. So they've got to get very close to shore.
Yes.
Okay. Wow. That's fascinating. I think those were all the questions that came in on the chat. So I just wanted to say again, thank you so much, Greg. This has been fascinating. I know you have a very important birthday date to get to. So
well, I'm doing all right. I don't mind staying a few more minutes if need. I don't mind, but really folks can reach out to me.
And really appreciate your time. And thank you so much for being here and for kind of helping educate all of us. I appreciate that.
You're very welcome. And I want to thank everybody for coming today. It was great to have everyone. And my email's through the state, so reach out. And someday I'll come to Westport again and visit the center.
Yeah, wonderful.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Do I need to hand it back to you, Deborah?
Yeah, you can hand it back to me, and then I'll
do that right now.
And you're getting lots of thanks in the chat room now, so that's wonderful.
Thank you, Greg.
Oh, you're welcome. Great to meet you guys.
Good to meet you.
Yeah, take care.
All right. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Great. Well, again, thanks for all of you for coming. And I want to encourage you, if you're not a member of the Alliance, to join our organization, get on our mailing list and on our email communication with Steve's wonderful River News. You'll get lots of information every month. We put out a fascinating article by one of our young people about different species that are in our watershed. So wow, now I'm on echo. So I'm going to take any other questions, but if not, we'll say goodnight and have a wonderful time. I hope you'll also join us for our winter art show, which is now a little bit later than it used to be, which will take place in the month of April at the River Center. And again, many beautiful works from local artists donated to help raise funds for our organization. So it's a wonderful event, and you don't even have to come this year. You can just look online and you can make your bids there if you don't want to come into the River Center. So thank you all for joining us tonight. Do we have the Horseshoe Talk online, Steve, yet?
Well, it is available, but it's not really online. You have to email me and I can send you the link to the recorded lecture, which we have saved. So my email is outreach@wrwa.com.
Yeah, the lecturer requested that we not post it publicly because a lot of his material is copyrighted. So he's asking you to be considerate and to view it and not to share it after you view it, okay? But he would like for you to see it. So thank you all for being here tonight. And we will be doing more of these talks and conversations. We have one coming up in April on native plantings, and it may actually involve a little bit of heavy labor in the back of the building, doing some planting that in the 4th Thursday in April with Sarah LaValle. So we'll see you all then, if not before.